Work in the maritime industry is carried out around the clock, and it is especially important that personnel are both physically and mentally fit to ensure a safe working environment is maintained at all times. Ship owners must ensure that the hours that seafarers work and rest are regulated and consistent with the provisions set out in the Maritime Labour Convention. The MLC states that seafarers' maximum working hours should be 14 hours in any 24-hour period and 72 hours in any 7-day period. Seafarers' minimum hours of rest should be 10 hours within any 24-hour period and 77 hours in any 7-day period. Hours of rest may be divided into 2 periods, one of which must be at least 6 hours long. Seafarers cannot work for more than 14 hours without taking any rest. The hours of work and rest for all crew members, commonly referred to as the shipboard working arrangement, must be displayed in a place that is easily accessible by all seafarers. This table must be provided in the working language of the ship and in English. In addition, a log recording the hours of work and rest for every crew member must be maintained at all times. This log must be signed by the master or a person authorized by the master and the seafarer and be available for inspection on request. Please note, seafarers must also receive an endorsed copy of their hours of work and rest. There will be times when personnel may be disturbed during their rest periods in order to carry out operational-related call-outs or manage emergency situations. If an individual has been woken from sleep to complete their duties, this should be taken into account when considering their level of fatigue risk during assessment. In the event of an emergency response situation, all extra hours worked must be recorded. Wherever possible, there should be a regular rotation of emergency response personnel to ensure that anyone required to work out with their normal hours within this capacity is provided with adequate rest and recovery time. Personnel must be granted compensatory rest periods if they are required to be on call during rest hours, and arrangements shall be in place to allow for hours of work that may be required in case of emergency. Please note, lifeboat drills, firefighting drills, and drills prescribed by national laws and regulations should be conducted so as to cause minimum disruption to rest periods. So, what is fatigue? Fatigue is more than just feeling tired after a day's work. Fatigue is commonly accepted to be a state of mental or physical exhaustion that can significantly impact on your ability to work safely, communicate clearly, and react effectively in an emergency situation. Common causes of fatigue include a lack of sleep, stress, anxiety, overwork, and poor health. We often underestimate the negative effects that fatigue can have on our performance, while simultaneously overestimating our ability to cope with it. If fatigue is not carefully managed, it can have disastrous consequences. Let's take a look at an example of a major incident where fatigue was found to be a significant contributing factor. On the 24th of March 1989, the tanker Exxon Valdez ran aground on the Bligh Reef in Alaska's Prince William Sound. The tanker's hull was damaged and the equivalent of more than 250,000 barrels of oil spilt into the Pacific Ocean. The subsequent U.S. National Transportation Safety Board investigation found that worker fatigue had played a significant role in the incident, stating that there were no rested deck officers on the Exxon Valdez available to stand the navigation watch when the vessel departed from the Alyeska terminal. It is essential that all personnel continually monitor and assess the risk of human fatigue during all work activities. You should always be aware of the symptoms of fatigue and look out for them in yourself and your colleagues. Do you know what the symptoms of fatigue are? Type the symptoms you think you should look out for into the space provided. When you're happy with your answer, press the Submit button. Some of the most common symptoms of fatigue include yawning, poor hand-eye coordination, fidgeting, microsleeps, lack of energy, slow reflexes, speech difficulties, and head nodding. As well as physically affecting our bodies, fatigue can also affect the way we behave and interact with others. Common behavioral effects of fatigue can include irritability, impatience and mood changes, increased risk-taking, difficulty making decisions and communicating, poor memory, difficulty concentrating and limited attention span, lack of motivation or energy, and slowed response times. In order to minimize the risks from fatigue, many companies have introduced their own fatigue management procedures. This procedure will provide company-specific guidance on maximum permissible working hours and any overtime limits, minimum rest periods, details of personnel with specific responsibilities for managing fatigue in the workplace, contingency planning for unusual situations, and systems in place to monitor, record, and audit any additional hours or days worked. As a minimum, all personnel will be expected to comply with the requirements of the procedure by presenting themselves as fit for work at the start of and throughout their shift, notifying their supervisor if they feel their work performance is likely to be affected by fatigue, and communicating any personal fatigue issues to their supervisor. The risks from human fatigue are often given less attention than risks associated with major accident hazards. It is critical, however, that these risks are recognized and managed in the same way. Research states that 80% of all workplace accidents are directly related to human behaviors. It is therefore essential that fatigue is fully considered and appropriately risk-assessed during all work activities. A safe and suitable risk assessment should identify the specific aspects of an operation that pose a particular fatigue risk, quantify the severity of the risk, and identify suitable control methods. There are a number of issues that should be considered during a fatigue risk assessment, including mental and physical demands of the work task, work scheduling and planning, working environment, and non-work factors such as family or money worries. Examples of fatigue-related risk factors and some possible control measures are being displayed on screen. There are several methods that can be used to help identify personnel who may be suffering from fatigue. These include self-assessment and voluntary disclosure by the person affected, direct observation of a person's behavior, investigation findings following a workplace accident or incident, monitoring conformance with our fatigue management procedure, or completion of a fatigue risk assessment. If an individual suffering from fatigue presents a risk to the health and safety of the vessel, the individual must be withdrawn from operational activities immediately. Wherever possible, the affected person should be offered the opportunity to have a good and undisturbed period of restorative sleep. Thereafter, the master and relevant supervisor shall undertake a further risk assessment to determine if any additional action should be taken. The fatigue appraisal and assessment process must be repeated for every consecutive day that the individual remains on board and should be recorded appropriately. The health, safety and well-being of personnel is paramount. It is essential that you obtain sufficient sleep and rest during your break periods to ensure you can complete your duties as safely as possible. If you feel that you need any help to manage fatigue, you should contact your supervisor for support and guidance in the first instance. The supervisor will then liaise with the master to decide the best course of care. Well done. You have completed this course on fatigue management. You should now be able to describe the general requirements of the Maritime Labour Convention, MLC, in relation to hours of work and rest. Explain what is meant by the term fatigue. Identify the common causes of fatigue. Recognize the serious consequences that fatigue can have. Explain how to recognize the symptoms and effects of fatigue in yourself and others. Describe how a fatigue management procedure can minimize the risks from fatigue. Explain the importance of carrying out a fatigue risk assessment, and provide an overview of the appropriate management of a person impaired by fatigue. Select the next button to begin the end of course assessment. These questions are assessed